Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Jake Morrison, a rancher who discovered an Apache boy trapped in an abandoned mine. When Jake heard desperate cries echoing from the darkness of the old Esperanza Mine, he risked everything to save Takoda, not knowing this rescue would lead them both into a dangerous fight against child traffickers. This is an intense story of courage and justice, but what happened next left everyone in shock. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from Echoes in the Darkness. The Arizona sun beat mercilessly against Jake Morrison's broad shoulders as he guided his stallion through the rocky terrain of Copper Canyon. At 34, Jake possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that made women in town stop and stare, piercing green eyes, a strong jawline covered in perfectly groomed stubble, and a muscular frame honed by years of ranch work. His white cotton shirt clung to his well-defined chest, darkened with sweat from the relentless desert heat. The old Esperanza Mine had been abandoned for over 20 years, its entrance partially collapsed and marked with weathered warning signs that most sensible people heeded. But Jake wasn't most people. As the owner of the Morrison Ranch, he'd been dealing with mysterious cattle disappearances for weeks, and the mine represented the last unexplored area of his vast property. "Easy, Thunder," Jake murmured to his black stallion as they approached the mine's dark mouth. The horse snorted nervously, ears flicking back and forth at sounds only he could detect. Jake dismounted with fluid grace, his leather boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. The mine entrance yawned before him like a wound in the earth, its darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. Jake pulled a heavy-duty flashlight from his saddlebag and checked his Colt. 45, a necessary precaution in country where rattlesnakes and mountain lions made their homes in abandoned places. As he stepped into the tunnel, the temperature dropped dramatically. The walls were hewn from solid rock, supported by rotting timber beams that groaned ominously in the desert wind. His flashlight beam danced across rusted mining equipment and broken rails that had once carried ore cars deep into the mountain's belly. Jake had ventured perhaps 50 yards into the darkness when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold and his heart race simultaneously. It was unmistakably human, the soft, desperate crying of a child echoing from somewhere deep within the mine's twisted passages. He stopped dead, straining his ears against the silence. For a moment he wondered if his mind was playing tricks on him. But then it came again, weak, pitiful sobs that spoke of fear, pain, and desperation. "Hello?" Jake called out, his deep voice reverberating off the stone walls. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to press against his eardrums. Jake's grip tightened on his flashlight as he moved deeper into the mine, following the main tunnel toward where he'd heard the sound. "I'm here to help," he called again, his voice gentler this time. "You don't need to be afraid." After what felt like an eternity, a small voice responded from the darkness ahead, words in Apache that Jake didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably that of a terrified child. Jake's heart clenched. A Native American child, alone in this death trap of a mine. How had the boy gotten here? How long had he been trapped? Jake quickened his pace, his flashlight beam sweeping left and right as the tunnel branched off in multiple directions. "Keep talking," Jake called out, switching to the limited Spanish he knew. "Habla más, I need to find you." The response came again, closer now. Apache words mixed with broken English. "Help, please, help me." Jake followed the voice down a side passage, his boots splashing through puddles of stagnant water that had collected over the years. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, and he could smell something that made his stomach turn, the musty odor of decay and something else he couldn't identify. His flashlight beam suddenly illuminated a small figure huddled against the far wall of a dead-end chamber. Jake's breath caught in his throat at the sight before him. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, but even in his current state of distress, it was clear he would grow into the same striking features that marked the Apache people: high cheekbones, luminous dark eyes, and an inherent nobility that no amount of suffering could diminish. His long black hair was matted with dirt and tears, and his traditional Apache clothing was torn and filthy. But it was the boy's condition that made Jake's heart race with concern. The child's left leg was trapped beneath a fallen timber beam, and from the unnatural angle, Jake suspected it was broken. Dried blood caked the boy's arms and face, and his lips were cracked from dehydration. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered, rushing forward. "How long have you been here, son?" The boy's eyes widened with fear as Jake approached, and he pressed himself harder against the wall, babbling frantically in Apache. "It's okay," Jake said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." He pointed to himself. "Jake, my name is Jake." The boy studied Jake's face in the flashlight's glow, searching for signs of threat or kindness. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, because he whispered something that sounded like a name. Jake knelt carefully beside the trapped beam, assessing the situation. The timber was massive, easily weighing several hundred pounds. It would take considerable strength to lift it, and he'd have to be careful not to cause further injury to the boy's leg. "This is going to hurt," Jake said gently, though he wasn't sure how much English the boy understood. "But I'm going to get you out of here." As Jake prepared to lift the beam, he couldn't help but wonder how this beautiful Apache child had ended up trapped in an abandoned mine on his property. The questions would have to wait, though. Right now, all that mattered was saving a life that hung by the thinnest of threads in the suffocating darkness of the Esperanza Mine. Breaking free, Jake's powerful arms strained against the massive timber beam, his muscles bulging beneath his sweat-soaked shirt as he fought to lift the crushing weight that had trapped the Apache boy for what must have been days. The beam groaned and shifted slightly, causing loose rocks to rain down from the unstable ceiling above them. "Come on," Jake grunted through gritted teeth, his face flushed red with exertion. Every fiber in his well-built frame was focused on this single, desperate task. The boy watched with wide, hopeful eyes as this stranger, this white man who had appeared like an angel in the darkness, risked his own life to save him. With a final surge of strength that came from somewhere deep within his soul, Jake managed to lift the beam just enough to create a gap. "Now!" he shouted, though he wasn't sure the boy understood English. "Move your leg!" The Apache child, despite his obvious pain and weakness, understood the urgency of the moment. With a cry that echoed off the mine walls, he pulled his crushed leg free from beneath the timber. Jake immediately released the beam, which crashed back down with a thunderous impact that shook the entire chamber. Both of them lay gasping in the stagnant air, Jake from exhaustion, and the boy from relief and agony. In the harsh glow of the flashlight, Jake could see that the child's leg was badly injured, swollen, discolored, and bent at an unnatural angle. But he was free. "It's okay now," Jake said softly, crawling closer to examine the boy's injuries. "You're going to be okay." The boy looked up at him with those luminous dark eyes, and despite the pain etched across his young face, Jake could see the inherent strength that would one day make him a magnificent man. Even at 10 years old, there was something noble about his features, something that spoke of warrior blood and ancient pride. "What's your name?" Jake asked gently, pointing to the boy and then to himself. "Jake. My name is Jake." The boy's cracked lips moved with effort. "Takoda," he whispered in a voice barely above a breath. "My name, Takoda." "Takoda," Jake repeated, the name feeling foreign but somehow right on his tongue. "That's a good, strong name. How long have you been down here, Takoda?" The boy held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward what Jake assumed was the direction of the surface. 3 days. No wonder he was so dehydrated and weak. Jake pulled a water bottle from his belt and carefully lifted Takoda's head, helping him drink. The boy gulped greedily at first, then Jake pulled the bottle away. "Slow," he said. "Drink slow, or you'll get sick." As Takoda sipped the water more carefully, Jake assessed their situation. The boy couldn't walk. That much was obvious. Jake would have to carry him out, and that meant navigating the treacherous mine tunnels while supporting the weight of another person. It would be dangerous, but there was no alternative. "I'm going to carry you out of here," Jake explained, using simple words and gestures. "It might hurt, but we have to get you to a doctor." Takoda nodded weakly, understanding more English than Jake had initially thought. As Jake gently lifted the boy into his arms, Takoda's head fell against Jake's broad chest, and he could feel how light the child was, too light for a boy his age. 3 days without food had taken their toll. Jake's flashlight cast dancing shadows on the tunnel walls as he retraced his steps through the mine. Each step was carefully calculated, his boots finding secure footing on the uneven ground, while his arms cradled Takoda protectively. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words in Apache that Jake wished he could understand. "Stay with me, son," Jake murmured when he felt Takoda's body go limp. "We're almost out. Just hold on a little longer." The journey to the surface felt like it took hours, though Jake's watch told him it had been less than 30 minutes. When they finally emerged into the blazing Arizona sunlight, both of them squinted against the sudden brightness. Thunder, Jake's stallion, whinnied nervously at the sight of his master carrying a stranger. Jake laid Takoda gently in the shade of a large boulder and examined him more carefully in the natural light. The boy's condition was worse than he'd thought. In addition to the broken leg, there were cuts and bruises covering his arms and torso, and his lips were so cracked they were bleeding. "How did you end up in that mine?" Jake asked softly, more to himself than to Takoda. But to his surprise, the boy answered in halting English. "Bad men," Takoda whispered, his eyes filled with a pain that went beyond physical injury. "They took me from my people, left me there to die." Jake's jaw clenched with anger. Someone had deliberately trapped this child in the mine, left him there to die alone in the darkness. The thought made his blood boil, but right now, Takoda needed medical attention more than Jake needed answers. "We're going to get you help," Jake promised, lifting the boy once again. "There's a doctor in town who'll fix you up." As Jake secured Takoda on Thunder's saddle in front of him, the boy looked up with those remarkable dark eyes. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why did you save me?" The question caught Jake off guard. In Takoda's world, he probably had little reason to expect kindness from white men. The history between their peoples was written in blood and betrayal, and yet here was this child, asking why a stranger had risked his life to save him. "Because it was the right thing to do," Jake said finally, settling into the saddle behind Takoda and wrapping one strong arm around the boy's waist to keep him secure. "Because no child should die alone in the dark." As Thunder began the careful descent toward the Morrison ranch, Jake found himself studying the boy's profile. Despite everything Takoda had endured, there was something unbroken about him, a core of strength that reminded Jake of the ancient warriors his grandfather had spoken of with grudging respect. "Where are your people?" Jake asked as they rode. "Your family?" Takoda's small body tensed against him. "Gone," he said quietly. "The bad men, they scattered my band. I don't know where they are." Jake's heart ached for this child who had lost everything, his family, his freedom, nearly his life. But as they rode toward town and medical help, Jake made a silent promise. Whatever it took, he would find the men responsible for this atrocity, and he would make sure Takoda never had to face such darkness alone again. The sun was beginning to set over the desert as the Morrison ranch came into view, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded Jake of hope. Behind him, Takoda had fallen asleep against his chest, finally safe after days of terror. Jake tightened his protective grip on the boy and urged Thunder to move a little faster. Time was still of the essence, but for the first time since hearing those desperate cries in the mine, Jake allowed himself to believe that everything was going to be all right. Healing wounds. Dr. Samuel Hayes had seen his share of injuries in 30 years of frontier medicine, but the sight of the Apache boy, cradled in Jake Morrison's powerful arms, still made his breath catch. As Jake carried Takoda into the small clinic in Copper Springs, the doctor immediately recognized the signs of severe trauma. Not just physical, but emotional wounds that ran soul deep. "Set him down on the examination table," Dr. Hayes instructed. his experienced hands already reaching for his medical bag. Gently now, Jake lowered Takoda with the tenderness of a father, his strong hands supporting the boy's head and injured leg. Under the clinic's bright oil lamps, Takoda's condition was even more alarming than it had appeared in the mine. His beautiful Apache features were marred by dehydration and exhaustion, his naturally bronze skin pale and drawn. "This is Takoda," Jake said, never taking his eyes off the boy. "He's been trapped in the old Esperanza Mine for 3 days. Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. Not yet. He'd learned long ago that on the frontier, sometimes the how and why mattered less than the immediate need for healing. "Hello, Takoda," the doctor said softly, approaching the table with slow, deliberate movements. "I'm Dr. Hayes. I'm going to help you feel better." Takoda's luminous, dark eyes tracked between Jake and the doctor, wariness and exhaustion warring in his young face. When Dr. Hayes reached toward his leg, Takoda instinctively pulled back, a soft whimper escaping his lips. "It's okay," Jake said immediately, moving to the head of the table where Takoda could see him. "Dr. Hayes is a good man. He's going to fix your leg." The trust in Takoda's eyes when he looked at Jake was absolute. This white rancher had saved his life, had carried him to safety, had shown him more kindness in a few hours than he'd experienced in weeks. If Jake said the doctor was safe, then Takoda would endure whatever came next. "Doctor." Hayes worked with practiced efficiency, his gentle hands examining the broken leg with careful precision. "It's a clean break," he murmured to Jake. "Painful, but it should heal properly with the right care." As the doctor set about cleaning Takoda's wounds, Jake found himself studying the boy's face. Even injured and frightened, there was something noble about Takoda's features. High cheekbones that would sharpen with age, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and an inherent dignity that no amount of suffering could diminish. Jake could envision the strong, proud man this boy would become. "He's malnourished," Dr. Hayes observed quietly, his hands gentle as he cleaned cuts and abrasions. "And dehydrated." "How long did you say he was in that mine?" 3 days, according to him," Jake replied. "But I think he hadn't eaten much before that either." Dr. Hayes nodded grimly. "He's lucky you found him when you did. Another day or two and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. As the doctor worked, Takoda remained remarkably stoic, biting his lip against the pain, but never crying out. Jake admired the boy's courage. It reminded him of stories his grandfather had told about Apache warriors who could endure incredible hardship without showing weakness. "There," Dr. Hayes said finally, securing the splint on Takoda's leg. "That should hold while the bone heals. He'll need to stay off it for several weeks." Jake nodded, already making plans. "He can stay at my ranch. I've got plenty of room." Dr. Hayes glanced at Jake with interest. "You sure about that? Taking in an Apache boy might cause talk in town." "Let them talk," Jake said firmly. "This boy needs care, and I'm going to make sure he gets it." Takoda had been listening to their conversation, understanding more than either man realized. When Jake turned back to him, the boy's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but not from pain. For the first time in longer than he could remember, someone was offering him safety, protection, care. "You want me to stay with you?" Takoda asked in his careful English, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake's expression softened. "If you want to. At least until you're healed up, and we can figure out where your people are." "My people are scattered," Takoda said sadly. "The bad men, they came in the night, took some of us, drove the others away. I don't know where they went." Jake's jaw tightened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "Well, then you'll stay with me until we find them. You'll be safe at the Morrison Ranch." Dr. Hayes finished wrapping the last of Takoda's cuts and stepped back. "He needs rest, good food, and clean water. Keep that leg elevated when possible and bring him back in a week so I can check the healing." As Jake carefully lifted Takoda from the examination table, the boy's small hand gripped Jake's shirt. "Why are you being kind to me?" he asked, echoing his earlier question. "In my village, they say white men have no honor. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Some white men don't," he said finally. "Just like some Apache might be bad too. But that doesn't mean we all are. Honor isn't about the color of your skin, Takoda. It's about what you choose to do when someone needs help." Takoda nodded slowly, filing away this wisdom. In his short life, he'd learned to judge people by their actions rather than their words, and Jake Morrison's actions spoke of a man with deep integrity. The ride back to the Morrison ranch was gentler this time, with Takoda wrapped in a clean blanket and secured more comfortably in front of Jake on Thunder's saddle. The evening air was cool against their faces, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Jake," Takoda said quietly as they approached the ranch house. "Yeah? The bad men who took me, they're still out there. They have others, other children from my band." Jake's grip on the reins tightened. "How many others?" "3 more, 2 boys and a girl. They separated us after they—" Takoda's voice trailed off, but Jake could fill in the terrible blanks. "Do you know where they might have taken them?" "There was talk of selling us across the border, into Mexico, where no one would look for Apache children." The thought made Jake's blood run cold. Child trafficking was a reality on the frontier, but hearing it from someone who'd experienced it firsthand made it real in a way that chilled him to the bone. "We'll find them," Jake promised, and something in his voice made Takoda believe him. "First, we get you strong again. Then, we go after the others." As the Morrison ranch house came into view, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk, Takoda felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. This powerful, kind man had saved his life and was now promising to help save his friends. Maybe there was justice in the world after all. Jake dismounted first, then carefully lifted Takoda down, mindful of the boy's injured leg. "Welcome to your new home," he said simply. Takoda looked up at the house, then at Jake's strong, honest face. "Home," he repeated softly, testing the word on his tongue. It had been so long since he'd had a place that felt safe, a person who cared, whether he lived or died. "Come on," Jake said, adjusting his hold on the boy. "Let's get you fed and rested. Tomorrow, we start planning how to find your friends." As they approached the porch, Takoda realized that his life had just taken a turn he never could have imagined. From the darkness of an abandoned mine to the warmth of a stranger's kindness, sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. The hunt begins. 2 weeks had passed since Jake carried Takoda from the darkness of the Esperanza Mine, and the transformation in the Apache boy was remarkable. Under Jake's careful attention and Dr. Hayes' medical expertise, Takoda's broken leg was healing well, and proper food had restored color to his bronze skin. More importantly, the haunted look in his dark eyes had begun to fade, replaced by something Jake recognized as determination. The Morrison Ranch had become a sanctuary for both of them. Jake found himself looking forward to their evening conversations on the front porch, where Takoda would teach him Apache words while Jake helped improve the boy's English. Despite their different backgrounds, they developed an easy companionship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "Today we start looking for your friends," Jake announced over breakfast, noting how Takoda's eyes immediately sharpened with focus. "You mean it?" Takoda asked, setting down his fork. His leg was still splintered, but he could get around on crutches Jake had fashioned from sturdy oak branches. "I gave you my word," Jake replied simply. "A man's word is everything out here." Jake had spent the past 2 weeks gathering information through his network of contacts. Other ranchers, traders, and even some questionable characters who moved in the shadows between legal and illegal enterprises. The picture that emerged was disturbing but not surprising, a trafficking operation that preyed on isolated Apache families, selling children across the Mexican border to work as slaves. "I have a lead," Jake continued, spreading a hand-drawn map across the kitchen table. "There's a trading post about 30 miles south of here, near the border. Word is certain types of merchandise pass through there regularly." Takoda studied the map, his young face grave. "You think my friends are there?" "Maybe. Or the people there might know where they've been taken." Jake's green eyes met Takoda's dark ones. "But I want you to understand something. This could be dangerous. These aren't good men we're dealing with." "I want to come with you," Takoda said immediately. "Absolutely not. Your leg is almost healed," Takoda interrupted, struggling to his feet with the aid of his crutches. "And those children are my responsibility." In Apache culture, family protects family. Jake admired the boy's courage, but his protective instincts were strong. "You're just a kid, Takoda. This is work for adults. I'm the only one who can identify the men who took us," Takoda pointed out logically. "And I know my friends' faces. You need me." Jake considered this, recognizing the truth in Takoda's words. The boy was right. Jake would need positive identification to make sure they were targeting the right people. "If you come," Jake said finally, "you follow my orders exactly. No heroics, no acting on your own. Understood?" Takoda nodded solemnly. Understood. They set out 2 hours later, Jake on Thunder and Takoda riding Jake's gentler mare, Starlight, with his splinted leg carefully positioned. The desert landscape stretched endlessly around them, punctuated by saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings that provided precious shade. As they rode, Takoda shared more details about his capture. "There were 4 men," he said, his voice steady despite the painful memories. "The leader had a scar across his left cheek and spoke Spanish. They came at night when our guards were distracted by a fake emergency." Jake filed away every detail. "What about the other children? Can you describe them?" "Ayana is 9, with braids down to her waist. She's my cousin. Nalnish and Bidziel are brothers, 7 and 8 years old. They were so scared." Takoda's voice trailed off. "We'll find them," Jake promised, and the quiet conviction in his voice made Takoda believe it. The trading post sat in a shallow valley, a collection of adobe buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and Jake could see men moving about, some Mexican, some white, all with the hard look of men who lived outside the law. "Stay close," Jake murmured as they approached, "and let me do the talking." The proprietor was a heavy-set Mexican man named Santos, who greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jake introduced himself as a rancher looking for special workers for his operation, speaking in the coded language these men understood. "Ah, Senor Morrison," Santos said, his accent thick, "you have come to the right place. We have connections to reliable sources of labor." Behind Santos, Takoda caught sight of a familiar figure, a tall, scarred man speaking in low tones to another trafficker. Takoda's blood ran cold. That was him. That was the leader of the men who had destroyed his family. "When might such workers be available?" Jake asked, playing his role perfectly while keeping one eye on Takoda. "Very soon, senor. Perhaps tomorrow night. There is a delivery expected." Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A delivery meant more children being brought through this hellish pipeline. "I'll return tomorrow evening," Jake said. "Have samples ready for inspection." As they prepared to leave, the scarred man looked up, and his eyes met Takoda's across the courtyard. For a moment, recognition flickered in the trafficker's gaze, and Takoda saw the man's hand move toward his gun. "Jake!" Takoda whispered urgently. "We need to go, now!" Jake didn't question the warning. With fluid grace, he helped Takoda back onto Starlight, and they rode away at a measured pace that wouldn't attract attention. Only when they were well clear of the trading post did Jake allow their horses to run. "He recognized you?" Jake said once they'd stopped to rest. "Yes, that was their leader, the one with the scar. He knows I escaped." Jake considered their options. The trafficking operation would likely accelerate now that they knew a witness had survived. "We can't wait for tomorrow night," he decided. "We need help, and we need it tonight." "Help from who?" Jake's smile was grim. "I have friends in low places, Takoda, and sometimes that's exactly what you need." That evening, as the sun set over the Morrison ranch, Jake sent word to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years, men who owed him favors, who respected his integrity even if they didn't share his principles. By midnight, 6 riders had assembled at the ranch, all heavily armed and ready for the kind of justice that wouldn't wait for courts or lawmen. "The children are our priority," Jake told the group as they prepared to ride. "Everything else is secondary." Takoda watched from the porch, his crutches beside him. Jake had insisted he stay behind this time, and despite his protests, the boy understood the wisdom of it. "Bring them home," Takoda said, as Jake mounted Thunder. "Count on it," Jake replied, his green eyes hard as flint in the moonlight. As the riders disappeared into the darkness, heading south toward the trading post and whatever dangers awaited them there, Takoda whispered a prayer in Apache, for the safety of his rescuer, for the liberation of his friends, and for justice to finally come to those who preyed on the innocent. The hunt had begun, and Jake Morrison was leading it with the righteous fury of a man who would not let evil triumph while he drew breath. Tonight, the traffickers would learn that some lines should never be crossed, and some children were under the protection of a man who would move heaven and earth to keep them safe.